In today's world, where everyone strives for success and recognition, it's easy to overlook the accumulation of a particular kind of fatigue. It's not just a simple desire to rest after a hard day. It's a state where even sleep doesn't bring relief. A person goes to bed, but thoughts continue to relentlessly swarm in their head. The morning doesn't bring freshness, and the whole day is spent literally dragging the body along as if it's encased in invisible armor. The reason for this state lies not in a lack of vitamins, not in laziness, and not in ordinary weakness. It's emotional overload, which has been accumulating in silence unnoticed day after day. The great psychologist Carl Jung once observed that everything that remains unconscious, sooner or later, returns to us in the form of fate. And indeed, when a person stops hearing the voice of their soul, the body begins to send distress signals. This cry for help manifests not in words, but in a feeling of heaviness, in unexplained pains, in constant tension that doesn't let go, in a strange exhaustion that's hard to name, but that permeates the entire being. Perhaps the person swallowed hurtful words to maintain peace in relationships, made compromises to earn the recognition of others, suppressed anger, fearing to hurt someone, hid their fears, striving to appear strong. And all these unexpressed feelings, unlived emotions, remained somewhere deep inside, waiting to finally be processed, understood, and released. But how to do this if no one ever taught you how to cope with what you feel? If from childhood you were told that it's better to forget about troubles, not dwell on them, not to dramatize, it's important to remember that the body never forgets. It stores all the experienced emotions, and if they are ignored, they will definitely make themselves known. And here the question arises, what to do next? How to free yourself from this burden and regain the joy of life? The answer to this question may be closer than it seems. The human body becomes a silent keeper of carefully hidden experiences, recording every suppressed word, every unshed tear, and every agreement given against internal protest. The physical condition pays the price for all these concessions, manifesting in relentless fatigue. However, this fatigue carries a hint of sacredness, signaling readiness to release deeply hidden emotions that demand recognition and healing. Back pain, stiffness in the neck, heaviness in the shoulders, these physical manifestations which have become commonplace for many, often hide an invisible burden, unexpressed, unrecognized, and unheard emotional experiences. Carl Jung, an outstanding researcher of the human psyche, argued that when consciousness refuses to recognize certain truths, the psyche finds symbolic ways of manifesting, using the body as one of its most eloquent instruments. The body, unlike the mind, is not capable of lying, compromising, or pretending that everything is okay. Even the manner of slouching while walking can tell more about a person's life path than they themselves realize. Perhaps this slouch is a physical manifestation of guilt imposed unfairly, or the burden of others' expectations, or a role imposed from the outside and not corresponding to the true essence. This slouch goes far beyond ordinary posture. It affects facial expressions, gaze, breathing, poisons sleep, deprives energy, and disrupts digestion. It's as if the body is trying to convey what a person, under the influence of upbringing or fear, has learned to silence, turning into a silent herald of unexpressed truths. In modern society, physical pain is often perceived as an enemy, as something that requires immediate elimination and suppression. However, Carl Jung held a different point of view, considering pain a messenger carrying unexpressed truth. In this regard, chronic fatigue, constant muscle tension, and even some diseases can be seen as metaphorical manifestations, as living symbols of hidden emotional suffering. Think about how often you had to remain silent so as not to upset those around you. How many times did you hold back tears to fit the image of a strong person? How often were feelings suppressed in the hope that ignoring them would lead to their disappearance? However, such behavior does not lead to oblivion, but only accumulates heaviness, which the body, as a faithful companion, is forced to bear until the courage is found to look inside oneself. It's important to do this not for self-flagellation, but for self-acceptance, and to give voice to what has been forgotten. Perhaps memories of events at the age of 7 have been erased from memory, but the body retains their imprint. It remembers the experienced feeling of abandonment that went unnoticed, the fear that had to be swallowed, and the shame stuck in the throat after ridicule. Carl Jung argued that the unconscious is a vast archive of the psyche where nothing disappears without a trace but is only transformed. Unprocessed emotional experiences manifest as symptoms, behavioral patterns, and recurring behavioral models. The human body is a silent yet eloquent witness to life's journey. It doesn't simply react passively to external stimuli, but actively expresses what often remains unspoken. Defending itself from potential danger, it instinctively shrinks, like a beast preparing to pounce. In situations where warmth and acceptance were lacking, it hardens, like petrified rock, erecting a barrier around the vulnerable inner world. And when the need to be heard remains unsatisfied, it falls ill, signaling emotional pain through physical ailments. For example, chronic tension in the jaw muscles may be caused not only by everyday stress but also by suppressed emotions, words that a person was forced to swallow to avoid confrontation. Recurring stomach pain may be related not so much to digestive problems as to unresolved emotional experiences that have never found their way out. These physical manifestations are not just random symptoms, but living records of a soul desperately trying to survive in conditions where it lacks space for self-expression. Carl Jung called this phenomenon repressed material, fragments of personality that are not allowed to manifest in consciousness. Like any suppressed psychic energy, these parts seek detours to assert themselves, often finding a way out through the body. A person can silence their mind for a while, suppress painful memories and unpleasant feelings, but the body never forgets. It holds the memory of every situation when the individual went against their own will to earn the approval of others, of every yes said out of fear or conformity, while the soul desperately cried no. This is the price to be paid for unconscious adaptation to the external world, and this price gradually accumulates until it manifests as physical or emotional pain. However, the same body that holds the scars of past traumas is also the key to healing. It also holds the memory of inner strength, of the true essence of the person, of the path back to wholeness and harmony with oneself. The human body is a complex mechanism that constantly signals its condition, and often it requires not so much medication as attentive care. Carl Jung, an outstanding psychologist, viewed bodily manifestations as a reflection of the mental state. Any physical symptom, in his opinion, is a symbolic message from the depths of the unconscious, striving to be heard by the conscious mind. For example, back pain may symbolize the burden of years lived when a person is forced to bear the burdens of others. Constant sore throats may be associated with suppressing one's own voice, with the habit of being silent so as not to cause discomfort to others. Migraines, in turn, may be the result of accumulated unexpressed thoughts and suppressed emotions that have never found a way out. In analytical psychology, symptoms are not seen as enemies, but as peculiar allies. They indicate that there has been a failure in the body, which has an emotional, symbolic, and archetypal nature. Of course, you can resort to painkillers or see a doctor, which is undoubtedly necessary. However, at the same time, you should ask yourself the questions: what is this pain trying to convey? What has not yet been said? What is it time to get rid of? The body has wisdom and sends signals long before the problem develops into serious symptoms. If a person ignores these signals, the body amplifies them until it forces them to stop and listen. Jung believed that this is the soul's invitation to integrate rejected aspects of personality. After all, what is not integrated is projected outward and returns in the form of pain, disappointment, and limitations. However, this should not be seen as punishment. It is rather a way to remind a person of themselves, to return those parts of the personality that have frozen in time. How often, having cast aside fear, has a person listened to the signals of their body, not seeking to immediately fix it, drown it out, or suppress it? Perhaps it is time to rethink the approach. Instead of looking for ways to get rid of the pain, try to understand what message it carries. A person learned to be strong, but at what cost did this strength come? How many times did you have to hold back pain so as not to burden others? How many times did you hide your fatigue behind a strained smile? How many times did you say the standard, "everything is fine," when a storm was raging inside? Carl Jung argued that the shadow is not only a collection of negative or unacceptable personality traits, but also everything that has been suppressed for the sake of approval and love, including natural human feelings such as sadness, anger, and vulnerability. The more a person suppresses their emotions, the more they accumulate in the body, as the soul has nowhere to release them. It remains trapped inside, bound by automatic phrases like, "It's nothing," "It will pass," "I can handle it." But the pain doesn't go away, and handling it becomes impossible because the body isn't designed to process unexpressed emotions. It endures for a while, but sooner or later, these emotions start seeping out as aches, insomnia, exhaustion, and apathy. This is the price of emotional silence. The soul, feeling ignored, begins to desperately cry out for attention. But it needs genuine, sincere attention, not attention dictated by guilt, judgment, or a desire to quickly get rid of the problem. Attention that implies the ability to listen, pause, and be present in the moment. Jung was convinced that true healing is impossible without honest self-examination, as it's not just the body that suffers, but also the connection with oneself. And this disconnect begins precisely when a person stops expressing their true feelings, when they shape themselves to please others, when they stay silent to conform. The optimistic news is that returning to oneself is possible, and it begins with a simple but profound question. What within you has been left unattended for too long? There's no need to engage in conflict with your body. It's important to learn to listen to its signals. As Carl Jung stated, the body and soul are not separate entities, but rather reflect and shape each other, intricately intertwined. Physical illness often serves as a signal from the soul, crying out for help. However, instead of embracing this pain as an opportunity for understanding, modern culture prescribes fighting, suppressing, and ignoring it, viewing the symptom as an enemy rather than a sign. The problem is that the stronger the desire to suppress one's feelings, the more inventive the body becomes in its attempts to attract attention until the pain becomes a habitual state. As a result, a person begins to live mechanically, barely moving their tired body with an absent soul. But there is an alternative path, beginning with mindful presence. Placing a hand on the chest, one should sincerely ask oneself, what hurts here? What have I distanced myself from? What have I still been unable to put into words? Healing begins with ceasing to run away, with the ability to be alone with oneself, showing the same care and compassion that would be offered to a wounded friend. This isn't an instant solution, but a gradual and courageous process of reconnecting with oneself. Jung taught that the soul communicates through symbols, and the body is a living embodiment of these symbols. It accurately reflects all the suppressed feelings that are still pulsating inside. By addressing this symbolic language with awareness, one not only listens to oneself but also integrates different aspects of one's personality. When previously separated parts reunite, a new vitality arises, the source of which is not in effort but in wholeness, inner unity, and freedom from the need to hide one's true essence. It's quite possible that what a person has become accustomed to considering their vulnerability is actually a manifestation of their soul's strength, striving for self-preservation, a tendency to cry, heightened perception, and the ability to notice hidden meanings may have forced them to build a protective barrier, to harden. However, according to Jung, it is precisely heightened sensitivity that opens the way to the unconscious. Thanks to it, an individual is able to grasp the subtlest nuances of existence, barely perceptible pain, and implicit signs that escape rational understanding, but are invariably registered by the body. The problem is that in a society oriented towards productivity, sensitivity is often perceived as a flaw, leading to its suppression. People learn to shut off their feelings, avoid expressing themselves, and restrain their reactions, but the body continues its work, absorbing, feeling, and pulsating, even when the mind is silent. This dissonance between internal experiences and external expression creates internal conflicts, generating fatigue, pain, and a sense of emptiness. Jung argued that a symptom is always the soul's attempt to restore harmony. In this context, sensitivity appears as a valuable gift, allowing one to hear the body's signals before they escalate into a scream. Perhaps a person's physical condition isn't a weakness, but rather fatigue from wearing protective armor. Perhaps the body simply needs to be allowed to experience feelings sincerely, gradually, and with compassion. After all, one who possesses deep sensitivity is also capable of deep healing. Healing then lies not in overcoming pain, but in consciously experiencing it. To be sensitive is to have the courage to live in accordance with one's true essence. When this courage returns, the body senses the change. Tension subsides, breathing becomes free, and the soul fills with joy. Throughout his life, a person has devoted himself to maintaining external order, but now his inner world demands persistent attention. As the eminent psychologist Carl Jung stated, true healing lies not in simply eliminating symptoms, but in the ability to listen to their message. The body acts as a messenger, and each pain carries a unique story, intended not to punish, but to remind us of ourselves. One should not consider oneself weak. Rather, one is exhausted by the constant suppression of undigested emotions, silence for the sake of maintaining an imaginary peace, and living in contradiction with one's true essence. The body is not an enemy. On the contrary, it is the most loyal part of oneself. Even without words, it tirelessly protected, signaled distress, warned of excessive loads, and supported, even when the person himself rejected himself. And now perhaps the body is only asking to return home to one's true self, to attentively listen to what is stuck in the chest, to accept what has been stifled in the throat, to allow the soul to move freely without hiding or restraining itself. The exhaustion that a person feels is not a manifestation of laziness, but rather the result of unexpressed feelings, unshed tears, and unreleased grievances. However, this state is not a defining factor of personality, but rather serves as a call to a more conscious and fulfilling life. It is an invitation to learn to listen to the inner voice, to those vibrations that originate in the depths of the soul before the body is forced to cry out for help again. After all, when a person finds the courage to listen to himself, his body finds long-awaited relaxation, the soul sighs with relief, and life gradually returns to its natural